Hello, my name is Jung Dae Seo. I am currently working as a director at the Korea Business Economic Research Institute. What I'm going to tell you today is about the policy and implementation system for Korean SMEs. Today's contents can be divided into four main categories. First, Korean SMEs and SME policies. Second, the implementation system of Korean SME policies. Third, the support program of Korean SME policies. And lastly, the policy implications of these contents. First of all, if you take a look at the graph of Korean SMEs' economic growth, you can see the graph is talking about the trend of GDP per capita in US dollars from 1968 to 2019. This rapid economic growth has been shown in recent economic figures, including GDP per capita, exports, and R&D expenditure to GDP. Korea ranked 10th in GDP in the world, 28th in GDP per capita, 5th in export, and the world's number 1 in R&D expenditure to GDP. These economic achievements have been greatly attributed to Korea's economic development strategies from the 1960s to 1980s, especially owing to export-oriented strategies, policies to foster heavy and chemical industries, strategies centered on large corporations, and successive 5-year plans for economic development by Korean government. Although economic growth was achieved rapidly thanks to these strategies, role of Korean SME sector has been relatively weak. In particular, the perception of the role of SMEs was merely to support large companies and supply daily necessities focused on light industry. And thus, the potential or achievement of SMEs was significantly underestimated and overlooked. It is therefore correct to say that the SME sector was rarely touched by the government until the end of the 1970s. So first of all, what's the difference of SMEs in Korea? Since SMEs have actually different definitions from country to country, we need to look into the definition of SMEs in Korea. Korean companies can be broadly categorized into SMEs and large enterprises, and SMEs can be further categorized into micro-enterprises, small enterprises, and medium enterprises. Therefore, SMEs are defined as companies of which average turnover for 3 years reach a certain amount. This definition, of course, varies depending on the industry. In particular, the standard is slightly higher in the manufacturing industry and lower in the service industry. However, I can tell you that this definition was somewhat different in the past, and this standard was defined according to the total number of employees and capital size until 2014. The SMEs account for 99.9% in terms of the number of companies, 83% in terms of employment, and 48.5% in terms of turnover. In fact, the reality in Korea is that most SMEs or enterprises are micro-enterprises. In fact, the reality in Korea is that most SMEs or enterprises are micro-enterprises. And especially in the case of large corporations, despite of a very small number equaling to 0.1%, it accounts for almost half of the total turnover. SMEs are engaged in various industries. where wholesale and retail businesses have the largest number of SMEs, and manufacturing businesses have the largest number of employees. SMEs account for 23.5% in private investment for R&D, which is one of the weakest areas, and less than 20% in exports. Then, we need to look at how the SME policies have developed. First of all, I can say that SME policies have continued to evolve as part of industrial policies, according to Korea's political, economic, and social situations. In the 1950s, the Korean War destroyed all of its infrastructures for 3 years, and the only thing that the Korean economy could actually rely on was foreign aid. Since economic policies had to be implemented with foreign aid, SMEs have hardly benefited from the policies. In the 1960s, the 5-year Economic Development Plan had just begun for the first time. Following the 1950s, the government's economic strategies were focused on larger companies and industries, which relatively marginalized SMEs. But one thing to be noted is that the SME department was once established. At that time, it was only a small department belonging to the Ministry of Industry. But it was meaningful that it began to have a legal system to support SMEs. What is particularly noteworthy is the fact that SME policies have begun to focus on SME business cooperatives and industrial associations. In the 1970s, such policies centered on large corporations were more accelerated, which forced SMEs to be subcontractors of large corporations. It was a period when the subcontracting system was even more solidified. As I mentioned earlier, SMEs could find significance as suppliers of parts and materials to large companies. But the government implemented such policies to protect the areas of SMEs through some initiatives. In the 1980s, it was perhaps the first time when the greatest attention was paid to SME policy across all institutions, probably being a big turning point. At this time, the government strongly began to protect the business areas of SMEs and impose strong sanctions against the unfair practices of large corporations. Because of widening gap between large enterprises and SMEs. Even in the 1990s, the gap between large enterprises and SMEs was still widening. However, it is noteworthy in the 1990s that the government began to implement policies with the recognition that ventures and startups were very important. In particular, the government put a lot of effort into R&D, factory automation, CEO's capabilities, and startup for SMEs, especially in the high technology field. Also noteworthy was the establishment of the Small and Medium Business Administration for the first time in 1996. As a result, it was an opportunity for a separate government agency to implement SME policies. In the 2000s, the government still emphasized innovative SMEs and implemented policies to support these innovative SMEs, especially to strengthen the capabilities of SMEs to lay the foundation for self-development. It was the policy of the 2000s that brought about a new recognition of SMEs as a source of innovation and job creation. Like in the 2000s, similar policies were still implemented in the 2010s. But it is worth noting in the 2010s that the government implemented such policies to further improve the business environment for SMEs, especially emphasizing fair partnership with large companies. On the other hand, a policy was put in place by separately designating industries suitable for SMEs in order to protect SMEs. For the first time in 2017, the Ministry of SMEs and Startups was established as one of 18 government ministries, creating an opportunity for the SME policies to be further strengthened. Recent SME policies were found to be focused on 6 areas: globalization, startup, microenterprise, technical innovation, creation of stable business environment, and establishment of consumer-friendly traditional markets. However, problems are being pointed out in the SME policies. New policy programs have been continuously introduced with the existing ones further expanded, and it is necessary to improve it through evaluation of existing policies. Without going through such a process, the policies have been fine-tuned a lot, targeting more SMEs. Therefore, it can be pointed out as a problem that SME policies became quite complicated with such a tendency to overlap. So, problems began to be raised on how efficient and effective these SME policies were, and how much achieved. It can be said that raising these issues caused negative views on SMEs and SME policies. Secondly, it will be the SME policy implementation system. It is the Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises Startups, or MSS in short, that should be the first and most responsible among government ministries that implement SME policies. This is said to be the ministry responsible for SME policies as one of the 18 ministries. As I said earlier, it was established in 2017 as an institution that expanded the Small and Medium Business Administration established in 1996. The Small and Medium Business Administration can be thought of as an institution that establishes policies, and there are many government agencies that actually implement the established SME policies, about 9 institutions. It can be said that the SME policy programs are implemented through these 9 institutions. To name a few of these SME policy implementation agencies, it will be the Small and Medium Business Corporation, which was established in 1979. It is implementing policy programs in the most diverse fields and would be the largest institution among SME policy implementation agencies. Next, KAISED would be an institution that implements related policy programs, mainly focusing on startups and entrepreneurship development. TIPA would be an institution that implements such policies to strengthen the competitiveness of SMEs in technology and information. SEMAS would be an institution that implements policies related to small enterprises and traditional markets. It is the SMEs law related to the policies, which is part of the policy implementation system. It would be such a law that supports the budget and policies of SMEs in each field based on the law, and 21 related laws can be listed. However, it should be noted that the first Framework Act on Small and Medium Enterprise was enacted in 1966, which is equivalent to Constitution of the country. It is the Small and Medium Enterprise Cooperatives Act listed in the 12th. Interestingly, this law was enacted before Framework Act on Small and Medium Enterprise in 1966, which means that the government implemented SME policies, including strengthening SMEs' competitiveness, first through the Small and Medium Enterprise Cooperatives Act. The third will be the policy program for SMEs. As I mentioned earlier, the SME policy programs are quite complex now, which can be classified by way of the policy objectives, corporate activities, or the policy target as I suggested. When it becomes complex in 3D or 4D, for example, the target will be manufacturing SMEs. Next is the R&D of manufacturing SMEs. Policies will be determined depending on whether the objectives of the R&D is startups or growth. It will be a program framework that supports various policy programs, such as funds, tax preferences, education training, infrastructure, etc., depending on the objectives of the policy. Among the complex SME policy programs, the programs actually implemented by the Ministry of SMEs and Startups can be broadly divided into 8 areas: startups, funds, technology development, HR, marketing, export, micro-enterprise, and undeveloped area. There are many programs in each of these areas, and the total number of such programs would be about 200. But as local governments and other ministries other than the Ministry of SMEs and Startups are implementing policies related to SMEs, there are actually a lot more programs. Among them, there are many different supporting programs for finance, including policy loan program, credit guarantee systems, and trade insurance, and many different programs for technology development, such as Joint Technology Development and SME Technology Innovation Program. There are also various marketing programs, including an especially important one called COSBIR, which is particularly noteworthy because government ministries have a variety of R&D budgets, which must be partially allocated to SMEs for R&D expenditure to promote technology development. 22 government agencies are involved here. This program has been implemented since 1998 by benchmarking SBIR program in the United States. The program was originally a voluntary program, but now it has been converted to a mandatory one since 2014, making it a more powerful tool for technology development of SMEs than ever. Next will be the Public Procurement Program. Public Procurement of SME Products scheme was introduced by the government to promote the sales of SME products, which encourages public agencies to procure many SME products and services to support them. It is still being implemented, and 842 target agencies or public institutions are involved in supporting SMEs. As of 2020, we can find that it was a fairly strong SME support policy because nearly 80% of SME products and services have been procured. Considering the sales of SME products and services compared to the total sales of public institutions. Among the former and present government policies, there was the Collective Private Contract Scheme, which has now been abolished. It was introduced in 1965 and has significantly contributed to development of SMEs through the SMEs business cooperatives. It was the kind of policy that the government had been active in as part of a typical SME protection policies. I'm going to tell you the implications of SME policy, its implementation system, and SME policy program that have been introduced for so long. The first thing I would like to point out is that each country has a different definition of SMEs. The reason for the different definitions is that each country has different economic, cultural, and social situations. This means that policies should be established considering how such differences are reflected on the policies. Next, the number of SMEs is high, but the amount of production or value added is quite low. This is true not only of Korea, but also of all countries. So, it is necessary to raise SME's amount of production and value added in line with the number of SMEs. Since SMEs are present in various regions across various industries, SMEs have very diverse and complex areas. Therefore, we need to keep in mind that the SME policy is inevitably difficult and complicated to implement. Although SMEs have advantages on management, it is the government's task to solve these challenges because of the diverse problem areas regardless of country. SME policies that are found in common regardless of countries are clearly effective and helpful, but such a helpful process, time, etc., vary from country to country. The key is how effectively and efficiently the policy will be implemented. Policies are being implemented for the same purpose in most cases, but development of the specific area is being made through a different path. Therefore, I can say that the results will vary depending on what the purpose of the policy is, how it is implemented, and what method is used. The policy framework differs from country to country, but the ultimate goal of the policy is not very different but almost common. Among them, how to develop corporate culture is one of the most important and effective areas of policy, particularly because it is the SME policy sector that shows different results. Since policymakers cannot establish and implement policies at the same time, how to utilize the enforcement institutions I mentioned earlier will be one way to achieve the effectiveness of SME policies. In particular, since we saw the complexities of SME policies in the case of Korea earlier, the evaluation of policies will be a significant part of the SME policies in order to make them more effective. Therefore, evaluation is an essential field, as SME policies continue to develop and grow, targeting a wide range of SMEs. Several important lessons can be learned based on this. First, it will be important that SME policies must win the support first from the public sector, especially the people, before planning. To this end, it is necessary to raise awareness of the importance and role of SMEs by getting as many stakeholders involved as possible. Next, we need to thoroughly investigate and study the contents of the economy, industry, business conditions, and SMEs, because every country has different environments with different stages of development. SME policies must be eventually different. In order to get different effects, research on SMEs or the overall economy needs to be conducted more deeply. Entrepreneurs' capabilities and improved awareness are particularly important among them, especially in the corporate sector. Then, one of the important parts is the SME policy. But it is necessary to understand that the SME policy has limitations. In particular, there is often a misunderstanding that SMEs can develop only with SME policies. But what is actually more important than SME policies is the entrepreneurship or capabilities of entrepreneurs. More important than that is a stable and smooth environment that ensures fair competition. Economic policymakers as well as policymakers for SMEs need to consider quite a lot, not only SME policies, but also overall economic conditions. It is necessary to design the frame of the SME policies with priority based on this. There are many cases of benchmarking similar programs in foreign countries, and of course Korea is no exception. What's important about benchmarking is that a thorough investigation should be done first on environment of the country and background of introduction. These benchmarking cases often end up with a series of successful stories, but we need to investigate many happenings in the process of success and how failure cases turned into success with improvement efforts. Next, we need to decide which target the policy will be implemented for and which policy measures will be used for the target. I can tell you that a simpler and streamlined implementation is required for all of these policy implementation. A bottom-up approach is more important to win the support for many people for policy setting, while a stronger top-down approach is desirable to check whether the policy has been implemented well. The last thing is that we need to monitor and evaluate whether complex and various SME policies are being implemented effectively and efficiently. Because the SME policy support programs are ultimately made from the people's taxes, if any program is not effective or efficient, we will not eventually get the support of the general public. Policy feedback should be made through monitoring and evaluation. Evaluation and monitoring are crucial for SME policies, since such feedback can lead to more effective and efficient SME policies. In developing countries, including Pakistan, such policies are needed to revitalize SME business cooperatives by industry and to achieve SME development and economic effects through the cooperatives. As the SME sector further develops and grows in size, intervention of the global value chain is available, which is often talked about these days. For contribution to the global supply chain, SME sector, especially development of parts and materials SMEs, will be important. In order to develop these SMEs, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to secure the economy of scale, which can be achieved through development of SME business cooperatives. It is quite regrettable that I could not cover a lot of information in such a short time. But I hope that these contents will be of great help to the development of SMEs in developing countries, including Pakistan. Thank you.